It's such a pleasure to be here in beautiful Newcastle. My first time to be here, and to be here for poetry. It couldn't be better. I just want to thank Teresa and all the organisers for the invitation. It's also a great pleasure to read with Abigail, whose work I admire very much. We met in London in January and had a hilarious breakfast. I still smile when I think about it. So I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. And it was written in the year after my father died. After. Now that her heart is bent over like larkspur after a storm, she stays in bed past milking time, pulling the quilt tight around her shoulders, until her collie barks her down the stairs to lift the back door latch. She kneels to light the kippings piled on last night's embers. Her bones creak like the bolt on the door of the barn. A cup of oats, 2 cups of water, a pinch of salt, porridge, tea, and tablets, a meal for a queen. Every day without him is too long. She's waiting with the tired cows at the gate. So that was the place I started, the farm in County Roscommon. I'm threading place through this reading. And now I go to the other farm that was really important in my childhood, where my maternal grandmother lived in County Galway. She taught me to knit and to read. I didn't do much of the knitting subsequently, but I did plenty of the reading. And amazing that she taught me to read. She left school herself at 12. All she needed. Days when bronchitis wheezed like a plebeian in her chest, she lit the fire early. I leaned back against her knees, my cheeks red as the turf flames. She helped me loop wool around needles for plain and pearl, and sounded out the shapes beneath the pictures in my book. Hens and eggs, cats and kittens, milk and bread. Granny left school to wash and cook for her father and brothers. I'd learned all I needed by the time I was 12. She never mentioned her mother's name, age, or home place, only that she died in childbirth, as if it was as natural as losing a ewe on a cold winter's night. So then moving place to County Wicklow. And I've lived there for 30 years, but probably about 15 years after I was living there, I realized that there was a mining heritage there. And I began to talk to the miners. There were 2 former miners that I got to talk to, and they told me about their lives. So I wanted to read this one tonight because of the 40-year anniversary of the miners' strike over here. And also last night on the news, I saw the old miners walking to Westminster, and I just felt a great sadness about it, for their trying to get their pensions. So this is in the voice of a miner who would have ended his mining career when he was in 1957, when the last mine in Wicklow closed, the Pay. I'd like to tell you I felt no fear, but every hour under Cammaderry was an hour too close to rockfall, jackhammer pounding, dynamite roar. 7 feet high, 4 feet wide, the tunnel mapped the mineral seam. My brothers quit for better pay, digging drains in Camden, but the mountains wouldn't let me go. Frost an inch thick on my shovel, I filled wagons with granite and lead, muscled them out of the tunnel to tip into the crusher, the master who had to be fed. Now brambles wreathe the adits, moss smooths broken stone. I'm hard of hearing, half crippled, hands fissured as schist, and still my heart lifts to see morning mist veiling Tonlagee. So earlier I was talking to Jacob Polly about how we create our poems. This is one of the wonderful things about being here. There's so many poets I admire in the audience and around about. We were talking about meeting people and finding inspiration when you go away from your own life. Sometimes at a distance from your own life, you can. I suppose it's about the empathic response you can have. So these two poems I'm going to read both came from a request to write poems that would mark the establishment of the border in Ireland for the 100th, the centenary of that, which was in 2021. So for that work, I met women from both communities on both sides of the border. And one of the things when they talk about the border, one of the big themes is all the ways they crossed the border when they weren't allowed to cross the border. And that led to this poem. But for me, it's also about, the desperate desire to connect, regardless of the border. Crossings. A gap in a hawthorn hedge, stepping stones in a stream, an oak log slick with frost, a three-arch masonry bridge, a cowpath down to a river where boulders span the width, a space between two barbed wire strands, a 5-bar gate, a byroad, a railway line, a deer run, a coffin path, a stile in a dry stone wall, a pass between two peaks, a rowboat on a lake, a bramble-laced bridle path, a fire break through conifers, a granite-lintled sheep creep, a butter path, a footbridge over a burn, 2 breeze blocks and a plank, railway sleepers laid in a bog. And another poem from that sequence. You know the way there's poems you want to write and they're there for years and you can't find a way of writing it. And this was one of those. And it was only when I read Incident by Natasha Treadway that I found the way in, because the first line of that wonderful villanelle is, "We tell the story every year." And this is a story my mother told every year, which was about having to leave a house when she was only 3 due to intimidation. But that is the story of people on both sides of the border in Ireland, but obviously people on both sides of the borders all over the world. Flight. Shove over the bolt, douse the lamps, lie down on the kitchen floor. Her quiet father shouted when he saw 5 men march through the farmyard to the door. He knew them from the fairs. They'd chat about the weather, the price of weanlings and heifers. Let them not set the house alight, her mother wept. They don't want to harm us, only to warn us, her father shushed as bullets split the shutters, splintered mirrors lodged in whitewashed walls. They lay on flagstones till dawn, curled into each other, a smidgen of warmth from the stove. Next day, neighbours helped them empty the house and load 2 carts, clothes thrown into baskets, mattresses, blankets, rugs, cups and saucers wrapped in tea towels, a can of milk, gifts of cabbage and soda bread. Sure you'll be back, they said, when these troubles are settled. Her father checked the harness, lifted her up between her sisters and tucked them in with a blanket, the family Bible at their feet. So last weekend I was reading in Strokestown, County Roscommon, only about 13 miles from where I grew up. But where the Poetry Festival is held every year is at our National Famine Museum. And I meant to read this poem last weekend and I forgot. So I thought I'll read it tonight. In May 1847, 1,500 women and children were evicted from the Mahon estate. The men were kept if they were healthy and young. So often families went without the man and the family. They walked to Dublin that's about 120 miles from Strokestown to Dublin, for the boat to Liverpool initially and from there to Quebec. About a third of those women and children died on the way to Quebec. Passage. When are we leaving? Who'll come with us? How'll we get to the ship? My scrawl of a girl has me mithered with questions. Whisht, I tell her, we must gather nettles and dock, then search for blackbirds' eggs. She's quiet a while till she whispers, "Ye were crying last night." Please God, she hasn't heard talk of the fever that haunts the ships. She's seen mothers cradle babies to the graveyard, men bent double with corpses tied to their backs. I lull her to sleep with tales of soft feather beds in Quebec and loaves of fresh bread. Her father will cross the ocean to find us, and he'll see her blossom like the whitethorn that brightens our byroad today. And again, as I was choosing the poem and preparing the poem, I was thinking of all the journeys these days, such similar journeys, even though that was 1847. So I'll read a poem. Again, the county I grew up in was very much a bog county, a county of many bogs. And the county I live in now, County Wicklow, has many bogs as well. We've the Blanket Bog in Wicklow, the Raise Bog in Roscommon. But when we were growing up, I mean, you know, it was a sign of poverty. Bogs were despised and yet needed. And now, of course, we realise that bogs are our Amazon and that they're precious for wildlife, but also for sequestering carbon. So there's a lot of work around restoring the bogs, and there's also a kind of a huge cultural change that has to happen so that people understand why they can't use the turf, burn the turf anymore. But I feel it's kind of a microcosm of the kind of change we all need to make in our attitude to the environment. Recipe for a bog. Block the gullies and grips where the river rises. Slow the downhill flow of peat-filled streams. Fell spruce and pine that thirst for moisture. Mulch parched earth with heather brash. Graft sphagnum moss from a healthy bank. Lay straw, feather light on fragments. Welcome rain, praise puddles spreading into ponds, count frogs, watch emperor moths in cotton grass, a spider trapped on sundew tendrils, dragonflies skittish from butterwort to asphodel, and a pair of low-flying merlin, wingbeat, glide. Okay, so last Saturday in The Guardian, people might have seen an article about the basking shark of Achill Island in Ireland, which we nearly fished to extinction, and now they have come back in numbers. Scientists are astonished. This is what the article was saying. The Irish coastline has 20% of the basking sharks in the whole world. They're the second largest fish, a magnificent fish. But anyway, I spoke to a man who had met him just by chance on a walk one day, a man who had worked in a fishery off Achill Island, and it led to this poem. The next day, I sat down and wrote this poem. At Percheen Harbour, basking sharks, docile as seal pups, harpooned and netted from currachs, were towed one by one to the fishery at the slipway. Fathers and sons sliced off dorsal fins and hacked through blubber to reach oil-filled livers. Sweating in burnhouse heat, they shoveled bleeding flesh into the rendering machine. They couldn't wash the smell from their skin, not if they swam to Inishgalvan at the end of every shift. Year by year, the catch diminished, disappeared. But late last April, old men cheered from the headland and said, "It's as if we've been forgiven." A school of 12 cruised into Keem Bay, moontail swishing, fins proud as yawl sails above the waves. So now coming to our garden in Wicklow, where we've lived for 30 years. And so this is the day we moved in. The key. The house looked like home that evening in May. Honeysuckle tangled in hazel, oak breaking into leaf, the kitchen warmed by a stove. Windows praised the hills. It rains the day we're handed the key. Linoleum curling in corners, damp patches on ceilings, blinds we can't raise. A marble rolls in an empty drawer. Heads down, eyes not meeting. We turn up the radio, sweep and scrub, unpack boxes, place our books on shelves. Darkness tells us it's time to rest. Lifting the bedside lamp from the car, we hear the Avonbeg at the end of the road, smell hay in our neighbour's field. A horse whinnies. Venus unlocks the sky. And connected to that poem, the next poem is probably my favourite poem in the collection, probably the poem that means most to me in the collection. And it was the last one to go in. The collection was really done and dusted, and I emailed Neil to ask, was there any possibility of putting this one in? And luckily there was. And spalls are from the Irish word spally, the small stones that help a wall stick together when you're building a wall. Spalls. To help us grow a garden, my mother and father travelled across the Bog of Allen and over the Wicklow Gap. They'd have preferred to drive west to Galway or Mayo. They'd have preferred a husband and children. But their daughter loved a woman. We'd have the table set for breakfast, rashers, black pudding, fried bread and eggs. When the soil had warmed, we unloaded shovels and rakes, buckets of compost and the rusted iron bar for prizing out rocks. The back seat was thronged with pots of seedlings my mother had nurtured all winter. We worked to her bidding. Loosen tangled roots before planting, sow marigolds next to beans, sprinkle Epsom salts around roses. My father took off on his own to spud ragwort or clip a hedge. One day he spent hours gathering stones of different shapes and sizes. By evening, he'd built us a wall under the holly, held together by gravity and friction, hearted with handfuls of spalls. So, coming close to the end of the reading. Just last week, we have red squirrels in the garden, which is an honour to have. I love them. But just last week, one of them got caught up in wire netting I had around a vegetable bed. And I had to go right up close with a wire cutter and a glove and with trepidation to try and disconnect him before he garroted himself. But anyway, I got him cut out and he ran. But in honour of him, I'll read an earlier poem about a squirrel. I mean, of course, when you get up close to a wild animal, it's a thrill. It really is. But anyway, so here he was 2 years ago. Thief in April. A red squirrel stretched upside down from a branch in the roan to the blue tit feeder. A tentative step. He zips back and sits upright, haloed in sunrise. From ear tufts to fluffed out tail. Half a step and he's gone. Needle nimble down the trunk across frosted grass. Wild as the morning, he spirals up the holly and springs, wind-blown limb to limb. Okay, so for my final poem, I'm going to read a new poem. You know the way it's always exciting to read from new work. But before I do that, I just want to thank all of you for coming along, and also to thank the organisers of the festival. And I also just want to take this opportunity, because I'm in Newcastle, which I think was the original home of Bloodaxe, just to say thank you to Neil and Christine and all the team in Bloodaxe for the doors they've opened for me and my poetry. So a new poem, which is going to go into a sequence of 7 sonnets by different Irish poets, which are called Earth Sonnets. So this is my one. It's a kind of a love poem. Dandelion. Once it was roses, camellias, everlasting sweet pea. But now, little dandelion, you're the one. Your flowers, the sun, your puffball, the moon, your seeds, the stars that guide. Your roots, fairy riches up to the light. You bleed when injured, and milky juice seals each wound. All the times I dug and left you to die, the siskins and linnets I deprived. This summer, you'll flourish in gravel, on the lawn, in raised beds among lettuces and chives. And beetles, bees, and butterflies will throng to sip your nectar. Thank you very much.